So my name is Laura Winkle. I'm the Interpretation and Engagement Coordinator for KRASL Art Center. This is Thursdays, and we've done this event a couple different ways in a couple of different formats, but most recently we've mainly been doing these virtually, and we love this because it gives us an opportunity to really connect with people from all over the world, as is the case tonight. So we really do thank you for tuning in and joining us in this format. We also do these in person occasionally. It is the third Thursday of every month, and the content is always connected either to the exhibitions in our main galleries or in the Art Lab gallery, or once in a while we do a third Thursday connected to KRASL's public sculpture collection or other art in the community. So for example, next month in September, the third Thursday of September, we're going to be doing a sculpture tour, and we'll take a look at some select, not all of the public sculptures in St. Joe, but some of the public sculptures at KRASL, and there in the area we'll do a little walking tour. So that one will be an in-person version, but always the third Thursday, always at 7 p.m. So we really want to thank you for joining us, and we welcome you to take a look at some of those other events. With each new exhibition, we release a new roster of third Thursdays. In the meantime, I would love to introduce Tammy. Thank you, Tammy, for being our host. Tammy Miller is our curator and deputy director, and she will be hosting this evening's event. I will be keeping an eye on the chat, and we'll get started.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tammy, so welcome. The beauty of virtual events is that I am joining you not from Michigan today, but from Minnesota. So this is great. I actually love it. I'm really excited to introduce you to Lou and Mark Rizzolo, who are the masterminds behind BIGthink. I had the great opportunity of working with Lou and Mark in 2018 on a project connected to the KRASL Art Center's Biennial Sculpture Invitational. And they created a project with our community, in our community, that was outdoors at a site, and it was it included inflatable art, it included community engagement, it included building things, putting things together, a drum circle, a whole host of ways that people were able to interact. There was prayer flags involved, and it was just a really spectacular event. And I really appreciated their comprehensive sort of view of how they approach their projects, and how there's educational components and there's performance components and there is the object itself, and or multiple objects. So it was really just a great honor to work with them. And when the KRASL Art Center brought in our current exhibition, which is called Blow Up Contemporary Inflatable Art, which are static objects that are inflated in our galleries, I immediately thought of Lou and Mark and wanted to bring them in to talk about the work that they're doing. So that's all I'm going to say. I'm going to hand it over to Lou and Mark and let them speak more and share a lot of wonderful images of projects that they've worked on and their philosophy and what they're up to. So welcome, Lou and Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank
We're both
you.
very excited to be here.
Yes, and thank you for the KRASL for bringing Blow Up 2, which I think is so important for people to see in the area. And we're just pleased to be able to be a part of expressing some of the things that we think that are really important to know about inflatables. So we saw the show. We had a chance to go over and see the show, and I saw some things that I really liked, and I saw that there were some things that other inflatable artists were doing that we had not done before. And of course, we're doing some things too that I suspect maybe they're not doing, and we wanted to express all of that tonight. Well, when you think about the thrill of going from a two-dimensional form, and then it's inflated with a gas, either helium or oxygen. And then what happens is that you get this three-dimensional form. Now, that might not sound like a very big thing to some people, but artists who work mostly two-dimensionally, for me, that was a stretch. And from my personal experience, I was a painter and educated in that way at the universities. And but I was hooked on something that I remembered a long time ago from the futurist. And the futurist had this vitality. They had this uniqueness, and there was some freedom involved in their work. So I saw a quote that, and I'd like to read that to you. It's by Marinetti, the futurist. Did you advance that?
No, I'm trying.
Yeah. And
The tigers of the.
yeah. So it's called Living Space by Tommaso Marinetti, the futurist. Listen to what he says way back in 1920. Well, we will remodel the sky, buoyant with polymaterials and architectures, will blend with clouds. We will create sun traps, huge funnels lined with thousands of rapidly moving mirrors. What a place, huh? Think about that. So, and then I saw a painting by Alberto Savinio, and it's nothing more than an object in space. And then I met, and Mark did too, Otto Pine in Grand Rapids. And so there, we started to realize that there was an art form that we had not had the opportunity yet of investigating, and we did. And we made big strides in that moment by moving to a particular direction that was at the university. And we were much involved in what we called then the Inflatable Light Workshop. Now that Inflatable Light Workshop, I came off MIT from sabbatical research with Otto Pine and sent out a letter. And for goodness sakes, people really wanted to study the brain for the first time. So what happened was that, yes, if you would advance that, in one of our class sessions, now this is way back in 1980, a colleague of mine, Dr. Buys, said this very brief statement that stuck with me. The brain is finally studying the brain. Now, in current times right now, everybody's studying the brain, but at that time, people were not that interested.
Only the medical fields.
Yeah, only medical fields. But Mark and I became very interested and found many professors at university and graduate students who wanted to study the brain. And so that's where really we began.
And as we tie into the show, a lot of what our work is not object oriented, meaning from the standpoint of that we create a brain as you see here. We do that. We'll utilize inflatables to articulate the skies, change an environment, create a unique dynamic, create a collaborative, create an interactive. We use inflatable balloons to help facilitate the lifting of artwork that are either semi or partly inflated. We use structural components to create three-dimensional objects. But the part that we feel that was a very significant challenge and what changed it for us is when we started to bring people inside the
Right.
inflatable. So what we hope to do is take you through some of our process and how we approached the types of things and projects that we have under belt and how it kind of evolved. And trust me, it's hard enough for Lou and I to put these into words, so hopefully you guys can follow along.
Well, I wanted to say one
Yeah.
thing before you move in that direction, that inflatables have been around for a long time. We didn't realize that until you start really to study the history of inflatables. I won't dwell too much on that, but back in 1780, the first hot air balloon was raised in Paris. From then there, if you go to like the First World War, inflatables were used in the war in a very interesting way to fool Hitler's offenses in the military field. There were different special forces that created inflated tanks and inflated airplanes, disrupting what Hitler was about, confusing the German military at that time. Then when you think about post-war World War II, you start to get into some celebrities like Christo Javachev and his wife and partner Jean-Claude, excuse me. They in 1968 installed the largest inflatable in KRASL, Germany.
56,000.
5,600. Yeah.
Huge sculpture, inflated and projected and held with cranes.
Yeah. Enormous piece. So that was one of the first major ones. And of course, Koons did the dog. I mean, we're very familiar with that. Andy Warhol did the inflated silver clouds. And Klaus Oldenburg, another very important artist. So the history of inflatables is very fascinating until we come to a particular contemporary artist right now I'm very intrigued by on inflatables, and that's Claire Ashley. I was talking to our daughter, who's a designer in Chicago, and come to find out Claire Ashley's inflatable workshop studio is right next to our daughters. Yeah,
that's very
kind of amazing. Yeah. So okay, that's a little bit of history, but let's go to our images and we can talk some about these.
So what we determined is through creative experimentation, as we started to utilize projection systems, lighting systems, inflation systems, tracing systems, ways that were back in the day where there wasn't a computer program nor the computer possibility to create an AutoCAD drawing for a formatted sphere or whatever shape it was. So utilizing both incandescent and laser light reflectivity, we developed lighting systems and projection systems. And then on the first slide that you saw was actually one of our first performances, which was in 1978, part of Super Summer 78 in Kalamazoo. And we inflated a series of domes, and we had projections on the domes. We had laser light systems back at that time frame. Here we see us beginning to utilize the lighting systems available, the three-dimensional shapes of the inflatables, and projecting slides, transparencies, colored gels, etc., onto the screens.
So understand that our interest in inflatables as vehicles to certain particular concepts we had. One, studying the brain, another one, peace initiatives throughout the world. And so, and also educational programs that helped all people to develop their human creativity. So we had those objectives as we were going forward, as Mark shows you some of these things, yes.
So throughout the creative experimentation came the outcomes, working with domes on the water, lighting systems on the water, helium inflated tubes on the, I believe it would be your right-hand side too, laser projections. There's an inflatable cerebral cortex on the inside of that structural armature that replicates some of the facets or convolutes of the brain. And from our process in developing through that experimentation and lighting, we determined that going inside the brain would give us the opportunity. We looked at concepts of developing abstracts, presentations, should we say, that would formulate brain activity, for example. Here, we're cutting out large formatted projection. This is out of white, low density polyethylene, basically of trash bags, and cutting up and then sewing it up. We utilized a clay model, and from scale, went to about a 20th scale to create this giant inflatable shape, which essentially was the brain. Lou
Can
has,
you grab that?
yeah,
Yeah, this is a good example of, is it seen? Yeah.
it's right there.
Okay, it's a very good example to show you the different parts of the brain. We actually had one of our colleagues go to the cadaver room at Western and study the size and shape of the brain, and we had to fit this, so to speak, with these different contours in terms of the relationship to the brain, all in different patterns. And of course, we wanted this long enough, and it's 40 feet by 20 feet high and by 30 feet across, so people could come inside. And then we would put on performances about schizophrenia. We had a medical doctor, Dr. Pike, who wrote the script for schizophrenia. We had dancers and music perform this inside of the brain. We had Dr. Cooper,
Occupational therapy.
Yeah, who also initiated and did the script for the experience of stroke. And so all of these were being shown publicly, and people could come in and see how the brain was functioning.
What was unique to this was that we'd create this immersive environmental experience. So within the brain, you saw functionality in abstract formats utilizing slide and video presentation. You saw there's anatomical structures within the brain that we utilize to either tell a story upon the script of like a stroke victim, etc. We use dancers to experience left and right hemisphere functions and their interactivity.
Right.
And we're dealing both with functionality and dysfunctionality of the brain.
Right. This shows an example of blood clot. Linda, my wife and partner, is an unbelievable artist, creative artist, and she designs all the costumes. And on the left is Jen, who is a blood clot, okay? And on the right, we see more dancers dancing out this particular script about the stroke.
So people would literally come into the brain and experience, things happening in the brain, thought processes, both exterior and interior, and what was happening anatomically in the brain as those thought process and sequences were experienced. And then the blood clot, for example, was one of our projects that we utilized that as I guess the motif, being at the brain structure and what happened after this person experienced a stroke, and visually, acuity and dysfunction began, etc. So we did that with several different types of scenarios and working with medical doctors to facilitate what really is happening anatomically, what's happening in that thought process, and how can we abstractly with content kind of prevent or provide that immersive experience of what the brain was going through.
This is, of course, the one image of the schizophrenic event. As you can see, the two dancers, one on the outside of the brain, one on the inside of the brain. But these scripts were written by professional people, and we artists worked with them to be able to create what they were aiming for.
And this was really just a multimedia performance in kind of a non-traditional format at the time, including traditional artistic, applications. So
you see how important the inflatable was for us to work inside the inflatable, not just on the outside. Okay.
So with the concepts, other than just the brain, in addition to that, we're working on sculptural pieces that would typically come in like either a maquette where we would have a dimensional sketch or a on paper type of sketch. We talk about what this process would be, what this product would be, and what it would be used for. And so over the years we developed, and Lou, you should probably take us further into what is called the hemiflora.
Right.
And this shows us in the fabrication development of not just the inflatable aspect, but the armatures, the inflatable, or the inflation attributes or things that were going to help being utilized within the sculpture.
So the mission behind this hemiflora, which means hemi, unfolding, flora, hemisphere, and that was for our second concept of art initiatives for peace. We thought that because people work together and collaborate together, and we've experienced that all over the world, that there's something very special about bringing people together in a collaborative project. And so we approached various nations, and we had 7 nations that worked with us on the initiatives, but the hemiflora became the object that promoted this idea.
And just ahead of what he's talking about is what I'm hoping to illustrate is that through this process became things of concept development that were able to be utilized in different formats. So you see down there at Detroit Institute of Arts, an articulated were those iridescent tubes and the helium arrangement, along with some other things. We've got the hemiflora, and then we've got part of the sail structure. So again, it's that concept development to get that outcome. In addition to that, this concept development, when we would propose different site plans, we would try to create a stirring, a visual representation of the energy, the excitement, the dynamic of a space. This was for a project.
This is what you did. This is very.
Yeah, thank you. This is for a project in Kerala, India, for example. And so these concepts would help us to kind of articulate what our plans were and hopefully display some of the energy and some of the outcomes. This is a hemiflora as part of the Peace Initiative back in Blacksburg, Virginia Tech, about a year after the shooting. So it was a time frame. And what was a really nice dynamic is these peace bags were brought together by, well, you should probably address it more, but several different nations and schools. And each bag represented in a very low tech way, a prayer, a thought. And it was a very spiritual and uplifting piece on their campus.
Over 1,000 pieces created by children around the world, as Mark said. Well, there's much to be said, but let's move.
So again,
this is your drawing of,
yes,
of our, what was it?
The hemiflora for art
prize
on the Calder Plaza.
Yeah, the Calder Plaza.
And then this, of course, this was when we got to install it. And this was the first year for Art Prize. This was a great opportunity for us being able to display on the Calder. Our actual installation for Art Prize was unfortunately tucked behind that building in the backside where no one could see it unless they were lost. So the day that we were out on the campus here or out on the plaza, I think we got into the top 10, top 25 or something like that. We thought we had some wheels, but anyway. And then this sculpture then is utilized for different presentations, different installations, some in the same format of what you've seen and some slightly different.
The top one, the top image shows the hemiflora opening an artist residency for the 7 different countries. And they came together for a week and wrote a white paper about how art could be an initiative for peace throughout the world. It included Italy, Australia, China, the United States, Norway.
Albania?
Hmm?
Albania?
Albania was not in at that time, no.
Anyway, sorry.
And then, of course, the one on the right is one of those installations for peace in Norway, in Stavanger, Norway. And the one over on the left is in Canada.
Calgary.
What was it?
Calgary.
Calgary, Canada. So the hemiflora could also be installed inside, and this is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And then the one on the right, I'm very fond of. Mark and I argued about even putting this in because he said, well, it's not an inflatable. But I said, well, there are 3 helium balloons and there's this long helium tube. So there's some inflatable parts there anyway, but this is comes out of a workshop for teachers where they learn how to integrate subject matter and not just teach math, but teach art in math or art in history or whatever it would be. So we were funded by the Michigan Department of Education for 3 years because of our good grant writer, Peter Middleton, who's our education director. And so what you see here is that image, final image over Lake Michigan. And you can just barely see some people at the very bottom.
You get a sense of the scale.
Yeah.
And as a safety advisor in most of my installations as well, this was something that wasn't supposed to work. I don't know if you've ever been to Lake Michigan, but it's never this calm. So
That's right.
This was quite a gift.
Yeah.
This and
Yes.
again, it's showing the combination of the light, the sound, the movement, and then the concept illustrations depicting, how it was described, what we would transform this space into.
On the left, of course, these dancers are dancing with Linda's jellies. She and Jan Warren and a number of other women created these beautiful jellies, these jellyfish. And Joan Bonnet was a part of that as well. So here we see the dancers in this wonderful moment caught. And then, of course, the one above is a video presentation going along with that Mark created that goes along with the whole installation. We were asked to do a work in Lyon, France, and these are some people working on Babar. And later it was taken to France and flown over the county building, if you wanted to go to the next slide.
Yeah, what I want to just point out here is that
Okay.
just showing the people in the process, the scale. Inflatables are wonderful because they're compact. It's like it's a tiny little plastic bag or ripstop bag. And then when
Right.
you open it up, it's this amazing large scale format. But with that comes I guess the responsibility of being able to inflate it properly and manage it, much like the balloons you would see at the Thanksgiving parade and whatnot.
Right. Babar was flown over there, and then way below Babar, if you can see on the screen, there's a sky screen created by Joan Rizzolo. Was it
Children of pre-K.
was it kindergarten? Or
Kindergarten, pre-K. Yep.
And was presented to the people there in France.
Yeah, this was a combination of both the Babar, the music segment, as well as,
Yes.
the reading aspect of it as well.
Right. Tell us about this one. This one was a favorite.
Well, yeah, so this, I guess, was my mistake, right? Lausanne, Switzerland, utilizing the tubes in such a giant open space. And as I mentioned early on, that, what we create are these opportunities to really pull people together from all segments. And I don't know how much we have in documentation in this presentation, but if you can visualize, this is 600 or 800 foot linear tube that has to be inflated on the ground by people, and it's not just one person; it's an entire group of people.
Right, right.
And if you have a 300 foot tube, you might have a good 20 to 40 people and or more holding onto these tubes, and to be able to utilize that as one unit and have these people holding on and in a sense almost collaborating, it becomes a very exciting dynamic. And then once they start to fly, you're always constantly dealing with the weather and changes in the weather, etc.
Otto Pine at MIT, my mentor, described drawing in the sky. And some people were puzzled by that, but this shows you some idea of drawing in the sky. And if you go back to that quote that I read about from Marinetti, that these are some of those architectural structures that they were talking about way back in the 1920s in futurism. There's supposed to be questions at different times.
Later. Yeah.
Later? Okay.
Oh, no, it's not. Oops. Sorry. There's drawings on the screen. I don't know where that's coming from.
This, of course, is a 34-acre crop planting that BIGthink created. And in the very center, of course, is the hemiflora. And around the hemiflora are the 26 nations with their flags. This was a peace event. And then the big stars that you see cut out are the 7 different countries that were supporting this initiative, the art initiative. So this was over in Albion. And
this was the celebration of what was, months and weeks of work
oh my, yes.
to combine this. What you don't see in the small squares and the moons on the outer perimeter are literally 12-foot by 12-foot paintings that all groups of people had a message about peace and were combined into this large format.
There were 26 different school systems, and those school systems each provided maybe up to 20 of these peace paintings that you're talking about, Mark. And they were displayed in each one of those. You can see in the lower right corner some of those peace paintings. That gives you a kind of a sense of what that was like.
And if you follow the path just across towards the center, there's literally outhouses that'll show you just scale wise how large this is.
Yeah.
And this is the installation at night. And with that, we combine Native American drummers. We had a group of choral singers. We had children with poetry. It was just a combination of all dancers. Yeah. And again, the piece, the luminaria that created an outline of figures around the central piece. So became quite a celebration. A lot of times we work with, smaller one-on-one types of projects that then get combined into a larger format. And so this is one of our first or second attempts to really start to bring in large number of a duplicate type of motif or outcome, like a luminara bag or a banner, and then create a larger piece from that. And through that, we found a lot of community, a lot of development, a lot of opportunity there to connect people through creativity, much like music does in the universal language.
This is a piece done at Star Commonwealth by our dear friend who was a part of the ILW at that time. And Jerry Catania created this waterwork. And I was very, very impressed with the simplicity of it. And we've been working on the earth. We've been working in the sky, but Jerry helped direct our attention to working on the water. So we look at all of these environments as places where, and sites where the inflatable can work for specific reasons, yes.
And I'm just going to jump in, you guys. And for those of you who don't know, Jerry Catania is the founder of Water Street Glassworks, which is a glass blowing studio in our community. And I did not know that BIGthink had a connection to him until we worked together in 2018. And it was marvelous to see him connecting with Lou and Mark while they were on site. So just a little context from the local perspective.
Great. And this is another piece, the Lumia Dome, early in the morning, floating at the Oxbow School of Art in Saugatuck. We were asked to do a work there. And there's laser light in that. There's a Lumia light. There's sound. And it was quite a unique experience to see it early in the morning.
Now, mind you, this is before we had any type of battery generators. We had ways of remotely controlling anything. All you see here is all running off of 120 with underground or underwater electricals. So if you can just imagine the the code violations we were generating at this site. So
We were pretty much into the analog system still.
yeah,
right?
completely.
Well, our second project at Art Prize, as Mark had mentioned, was to install in their city hall this installation. And you'll notice there's many figures in there. So we were focusing on community and the importance of community and working together and collaboration and how important that was. So this gives you one example of that one particular installation with color and sound and the figures, many different places, many school systems, Black River Public School, Central Michigan University, a number of schools.
Each one of us,
Yeah,
wrapping figures. So there's a combination. These are, inflated forms, but they're really just a skin of a tape, so to speak, and then the inflatable dome in the center. There's also tubes within the space as well.
so I created 30 different figures, and most of those there are showing these very expressive positions. So now, this is a very interesting one because I think on the left you see Peter Middleton, who's our education director for BIGthink, and his son Jim. And then the upper is our grandson, my grandson, I should say, your son, Skylar. And below, another colleague, Noel Schuler. And you can see the people engaged in these big tubes. And so this shows the development from the exterior of the inflatable, I would say. Not so much the interior. But
Yeah, and as I spoke to the aspect of collaboration, it's purely out of both want and need to get people involved, because I mean we can't do it without others with many types of these larger format projects. So
right.
The idea of just bringing in the general public and let them be able to be a part of this is a very unique and dynamic experience.
Working at Star Commonwealth with young boys who were in trouble, so to speak, and we have a community effort here, creating a sky screen. Their bodies are stretched out, they're holding hands in this gesture of unity. And the next slide, I think we should see right away.
Well, what I think I want to talk about here, though,
Okay.
is that in the process, we started to develop activities, so to speak, both based on educational backgrounds of many of the colleagues that we worked with, but just the playful activity of people interacting created a unique dynamic.
Right.
What we determined through that creative expression, it was shall we say, a low impedance. It was you didn't have to be an artist to participate in something like this. And as you see later, we got very unique workshop components of people learning to express themselves well beyond maybe what their comfort level is, with really not even knowing that they're doing it. So this is where I think some of the educational and collaboration aspects really started to open up for us.
Exactly. We at the very beginning in 1980, 4 of us wrote the creativity program. It's an educational program, 8 workshops. And on the right, you'll see people working on what we call selfscapes. And this is about looking at the self and identifying things that matter to us the most, and then transliterating those things into color. And so these big
Shape and form.
and form. And in addition to that, they had their own silhouette with this particular selfscape, created selfscape. On the left is what Mark's talking about. When you finally see yourself in the sky and you're holding hands with other people. And this was a very important collaborative piece. And we wanted to show you that it's possible to show that in a different format in Sky other than some other forms. The teaching is a very important part of BIGthink's mission. And one of our real fine teachers, you can see right now, describing describing the star earthwork. And these students are engaged here. And Nob Schuler is directing that. There is another one on the right of me doing something very similar with a group of people in Kalamazoo, students in Kalamazoo at the Millwood Public School. And I think Joan Bonnet was involved in that workshop as well. We're fortunate to have this picture of Dr. Cooper teaching the brain functions, the architecture especially. It's not a very good photograph. These go way back, I mean, I'm saying it seriously. Yeah, we did everything we could to get this as best as we could for presentation, but we wanted to have something that shows the lecture initiative, the educational component initiated in the inside of the inflatable. And then, of course, people from all walks of life, but we're at Northern Michigan University right now, and the person at the very bottom of that image is the dean, the vice president of Northern Michigan University. So we had all sorts of people, colleagues, faculty, students, all working together on these self-scapes.
The unique dynamic that I want to point out here is that we began to bring people into the environments, much like in the experience for the immersive presentation, lecture and activities within this shape, this dimensional shape that had no walls, essentially, or had no corners, should I say. And this became a unique environment, and the acoustics are different, the visuals, I mean, everything is really very ethereal. And this, we felt, was a really unique dynamic to bring people in and begin to provide lecture and education within these shapes.
So besides working on the outside, the inside of the inflatable is very important for us. And this image on the left is from Hope College. We were working with some dancers there. And one of the young men got inside the inflatable, and that was the first time. This was way back, but that's the first time that we started to think about, well, what could happen if we could put people inside the inflatable, which that has grown considerably to now the next slide, pardon me, the right-hand side is where we see the self-scapes and the silhouettes of people and this young girl experiencing this experience inside of this 100-foot inflatable.
The community was created, essentially.
This is in Escanaba, I believe.
Yeah. But the artwork, the outcome of the artwork creates a dynamic where people are able to engage in a visual representation. It just becomes a series of colors and words, but there's activities that would, help kind of connect like color, pattern, etc. And it became a really unique dynamic of bringing people inside and seeing what was created and how closely related much of the artwork was in so many different ways and so many different layers.
So you view, as a gallery, you view all of the artwork, it's up in the ceiling. You have a chance to see it that way,
Again, working with children, the right-hand part of this presentation was a Together Kalamazoo project that we worked on for several years. And what was interesting as an outcome for this is that the children were inside these domes and these shapes, and they're working on a project that is very similar to what Luke was talking about with these self-scapes. But then each one of these, it was a hexagon shape on a material, was then articulated onto a large geodesic dome. And then from there, another representation of seeing all our artwork together and how they related or they didn't relate became a community.
Right. This shows the third brain that we created in Ripstop. And we've had numerous workshops in it. We've had lectures in it. And in the upper left, you see Linda stitching these large patterns together. She had a fleet of 3 or 4 sewers, seamstress people that were really very good at putting some of these patterns are 40 feet long and you want to get everything right. And then of course you see an image of inside that, the third brain, and there are people working. So some of the workshops that we have are hands-on workshops. They're not all lecture. And this, of course, shows one of those lectures with all of the arteries and so forth projected in the brain, not projected, but actually created and inflated in the brain. And
but we did use, several series of other types of projection systems to provide slide and video presentation to with occupational therapy, with Dr. Cooper is one of our leaders. I believe, at this later date and time frame in the newer or this contemporary brain, dealing with neuroplasticity, for example, and how that affects in learning, or where are those thought processes that come from? How do the brains communicate, the sides of the brains communicate with each other? Teaching educators how combining those elements together just renders, along the terms of the whole brain learning or integrative teaching and learning aspects. And so we are utilizing the brain for those educational experiences. Right?
right.
Yeah. And that's us.
This is
So,
great. I will just invite everybody to join in the conversation. I know it's a little, off when might feel a little strange for Lou and Mark to be presenting this long and having us as little thumbnails maybe in their screen. So please feel free to take yourselves off of mute. Feel free to turn your cameras on. You can ask questions in the chat, or you can just have dialogue. And I know we have a great combination of educators, artists who are working in inflatables, and collaborators that have worked with BIGthink. So I really just invite you to have some casual conversation. And I actually, and Lou and Mark, I just want to say thank you for putting all of these images together and going through your archive, in non-digital format and making it digital. We certainly appreciate all the hard work that you
under
had.
500, it was our target, under 500 images, right?
Right. And I actually love the images. I love that they were, you can tell that they're pre-digital images. They're great. They're really fantastic. I wonder, it's so interesting to think about the brain, studying the brain, and that sort of concept kicking off a lot of the projects that you worked on. And as you were speaking, I was thinking about how today we talk a lot about our neural pathways and creating new neural pathways in the brain. And I imagined what a BIGthink project, including dancers and inflatables and all sorts of, details might look like, illustrating the creation of those new neural pathways. But I wonder, for you, are there topics that you're interested in exploring today with your work?
Are there new pathways that we'd like to explore with our work?
Oh, yes. Yes. We've come to a point where the brain architecture, and I think maybe where the brain is learning how the brain learns, we're looking at other things like consciousness. Much research
AI.
now is moving in that direction.
AI, yeah.
Yes, very much so. And that's one thing that we're looking at and studying closely. So I see that as a definite pathway, and also some specificity sometimes about some neurological issues Huntington's is a good example, and what kind of research is being done there, and how we could benefit people by developing that pathway. So we have a number of different ideas that we're exploring.
And so I've got to be honest with you. You know, we've come from this ground zero, right back when, you know, it was candlelights and flashlights to make things exciting. But,
Yeah.
you know, we live in such a polished world. I struggle sometimes to want us to become that layer of polish, that layer of computer generated, that computer, you know, high impact, you know, people can't pay attention for more than 30 seconds. How are they going to, you know, try to, you know, follow a presentation that we're doing in an abstract format? So I struggle with that about, you know, how can we do what we do and engage people, you know, other than a specific demographic that may only have that need or desire to learn or experience that. But outside of that, how do you get everybody involved in some format of the arts without trying to pretend that you're, you know, the next Marvel experience or what have you?
Right.
So
Yeah.
I struggle with that.
I think the answer, Mark, is not an analog or digital, but I think it's in human.
Yeah, that's it.
And
Interactive.
I think when you bring people together and they have dialogue, like's going on right now, many changes occur in dialogue. You know, I think that we know that now from research that when you engage in real dialogue, that you have to be aware that you're going to leave changed. You're not going to be the same. And I think that's really where the element is. And we can still use I call them periphery, the analog and digital. But I think it's the human aspect that really makes the big difference.
Well, I think in the experience too, that it breaks down, you know, our digital barriers. It breaks down our, you know, texting to partners. I mean,
Yeah.
we actually get people in a space and committed to this dialogue, and then being in a space that's unique and dynamic with, you know, doesn't have flashing digital phones or formats like that, you know?
Right. Yes.
One of my favorite images that you show is the second to last one, where people are seated inside the structure of the brain. And I think about that as an environment for learning and how powerful that is still today. You know, no matter if you're using analog or digital or both, you know, and your overhead projectors were probably really slick at the time, right? So like, I mean, yeah, but I think I'm very much an experiential learner, and I think what an impact it would make to be studying the brain inside that space would be so much more fascinating than if I was sitting in a lecture or just other ways.
Lecture hall with 500 others, right? Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, we agree.
Big difference.
Andy, I think Andy has a question. Andy, would you like to share your question?
Sure. First off, I have to confess I was the one that accidentally drew on that one slide.
Okay.
I wasn't sure what I was doing, so.
No, that's okay. I wasn't sure where it came from, so.
It was me. I did it. I'm confessing. So I was wondering if you could just talk briefly about your process, you know, where you go from concept to how do you actually build these structures? What do you like? I'm sure it's changed over time, but do you have, you know, you mentioned some seamstresses there for a while. Do you sew these yourselves, or how do you fabricate?
Yes, much of it. Yes. I think what it does is it comes in a dialogue first. We'll talk about what we want to do. You know, we've been talking about, you know, developing more community outreach types of projects, especially with the COVID. You know, how can we get creativity in the hands of others and let them run with it? And then from that, how do we utilize that in some big giant component output? And I think Lou and I have dialogue about those opportunities, what we feel would be, you know, there's always that aesthetic. I put myself in the genre more designer than I am artistic. That's just because of my personal commitment. But, you know, so we always want that aesthetic to be, you know, the appropriate outcome. And then from there, you know, I think we kind of build accordingly. You know, we're limited just two people right now to do so much that we rely on a lot of collaboration. When you see like the projects with, the medical aspects or, research components or more educational components, we have those individuals that reach out and work with us, so that, we're following a medical script that is appropriate for really what is happening to a human's, inner workings or whatever in the process. So I don't know if I'm answering your question or just rambling.
Yeah, I think one general thing is that we look at our dialogues as we call it ifing and ising. And I used to say that I'm an iffer and Mark's an isser. I get an idea and Mark makes it happen, but it isn't that way at all. It isn't that way at all. He's an iffer and an isser, and I'm an iffer and a little bit of an isser. I'll add some of that. Isers usually know how to make things work, okay? Because there's so many extreme ideas that we have to filter through. And I want to mention too that it's not just Mark and myself, but Peter Middleton is a highly respected educator. And he's been with us since 1991. And we have that, what we call a troikia. And Peter is a very gifted, creative teacher and artist. And so it's that troikia of ifing and ising, Andy, that starts to get ideas going. And there's other things that enter into it, like, the time commitment and the finances, the economics, the materials, new materials. Mark's very good at new materials. So it kind of happens that way.
Yeah, I don't know if we're answering it as directly as you'd like, but I imagine you're the sculptor, correct?
Yeah, I did the prismatic hope. Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's, from concept to playing around with it and seeing what works and then generating. I mean, I think, with so many years under belt, I think we already have some preconceived notions of how to do certain aspects that are a little non-traditional. And then from that the output is probably more tweaked at the end and not necessarily had to be conceptualized.
Okay. Cool, thanks.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The artist's eye is always looking somewhere to find something to be inspired from. And so I think that happens in the strangest places. I'm certain as a sculptor, you know this, that you get an idea all of a sudden from something you hear, smell, taste, or stumble across, and
Watching a leaf fall from the tree.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So things start that way, and it's a very fascinating life. And to be collaborative with this, I think, is so critical. Somewhere along the way, having a partner, a number of partners that stretch ideas and move them beyond where you ever thought they would be. And that's what I think BIGthink is about.
Yeah.
Peter, did you have a comment or a question?
I did. I wanted to thank Mark and Lou for doing this, and KRASL for facilitating all of it. It's all great. I wanted to add one thing that I found really important and inspiring. I came into the Inflatable Light Workshop Collaborative after it was already doing a lot of amazing things. And one of the things that really inspired me was this thinking that if you changed a person's space, you can change the way they think. And that really mattered a lot, because Christo did this. If you're used to looking at the Reichstag and then now it's wrapped in plastic, after the plastic's gone, you still have that thing. Like you've changed someone's space. And the slide we're looking at right now inside this brain, it's a classroom where if you press on one wall, the other one moves on the opposite side of the room. Like you're taking a space, you're changing it. It's beyond just putting a sculpture up. In this case, we're inside of it and it's interactive and we're doing things. And that was brought up earlier, but I really became attracted to this notion that if you change the environment, or you take an experience that people normally have, and then you put a temporary installation in it, how that affects people and how it affects learning and memory. And I remember a lot of times Lou and Mark and I would try to share with a funder or a community, hey, we want to do this thing. And we're trying to explain to people what it is we're trying to do, right? And then we do the thing, and you have all these excited people whose space just got changed, and they don't really know what happened to them because they're trying to now explain it. Like, right? What just happened to me? Well, I was inside this inflatable brain. And then it's okay, right there. Wait, what just happened? You know, and I think that's that energy is from the experience, and the experience that comes out of these environments, whether they're in the sky or in the water or on the land, or in this case, they're in a large ensemble room in a band room inside an inflatable brain in a teacher workshop. You have this excitement and this experience that you can never undo. And I think that's really an excellent impact for the aesthetics and beauty of what art can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, Peter, I appreciate the comment. I think it really kind of stems back to that creative common link, both for on a universal level for people, but it's almost back to childhood and play, that dynamic where there's no
Very
barriers.
important, very
There's no more
important.
barriers. You can reach out and touch that, and you can't help but touching it. I mean, it's engaging. No matter who you are or what perspective you come from, you are in this space that just even if you don't like it, it's generating a reaction that's very fundamental or very real.
It's without walls, and you're free, and there's that kind of feeling. It goes back to the futurists for me. I still see them really right on way back when. Thanks, Peter.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So have we stirred any imagination in anyone?
Scrolling through the images, see if anybody's taking their mics off and want to talk to us.
Well, you know, we're always open to work with people, and we always enjoy the expertise or just the knowledge that other people have.
Or the challenge.
Yeah.
Or the challenge. Yeah.
So collaborate.
Yes. Very cool.
I love that you have existing collaborators on here, and I will just say that I could see a few future collaborations as well, collaborators attending this. I hope that you do continue to connect. I think there's some interesting intersections that could be made.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, I'm gonna give it one last call to see if anybody.
Christiane, I'd love to have your perspective on things.
Thank you, Mark. I have really a question. You showed the babar, the elephant, and you told us that you had, during a lot of installations, different arts like dancers and musicians and singers and so on. So did you have the music from Poulenc, the piano work, during the babar in the air, or Jean Froissin, the orchestration part?
Yeah,
even if you did it in France.
Yes, it was the orchestral piece. Part of what we do at times are things that may relate more specific to a motif that wouldn't be our first choice per se. Within this presentation, the format, the engaging of children, with the, and I wish my wife would chime in specifically, because I don't remember if there was a live performance of the musical aspects of Babar. But anyway, yes, both were incorporated.
Oh, yes, yes, very much so.
But in addition to that, as part of this presentation, which we didn't show, were also some of the inflatable projects outside of the scope of just that aspect of the Babar portion. So the city had provided us the opportunity to come in and present, to engage, our children and their children, in a celebration around Babar. And I don't know if it was specific to a time frame, and I at this point barely remember the book per se, and the illustrations, etc. And then the different animals, a part of that, we articulated and Joan, you had some presentation in that too. I think one of the animals, you were the lion maybe or something.
Yes.
Joan Bonnet,
Yes.
who's
I'm
hiding in
here.
the dark. I'm here.
Hi,
And-
Jen.
Music was Saint-Saëns Carnival of the Animals.
There we go. Yep.
Ah,
It
okay.
included lion,
Rooster.
all those wonderful animals. And then Babar really wasn't all that much a part of Saint-Saëns except for the elephant part. But Babar was the children's story that was French
Okay,
origin.
great.
Yeah,
I'm glad we have an adult with us.
Yes.
not yet. Oh, no. An old adult.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
I-
had international musicians playing.
that's what I thought.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was really very,
And we've
That-
done some unique dynamics with live performance, orchestral pieces or whatnot, and trying to, generate a performance that's somehow related to that in an environment where you have no control. So, I mean, this was a controlled environment per se, because it was, in the city square. So it was a controlled space that things could be physically hung, but then we also flew as well.
And I want to say that the inspiration of just being able to hold on to the inflatable tube,
And not let go.
ready to be up in the air, you can't get that from the photographs.
Yeah.
Try to be a crew. I want to know when I can be crew next.
You're on the list, Joan, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah. Helium is at its highest premium in 20 or 40 years, I think. So,
Okay.
but that in itself is something that we've had to cut back on any of the installation work. Less and less inflated tubes that are flown or balloons that are flown, just because of that cost factor, and trying to get, a grant or, some type of, opportunity to do these types of things. Helium is quite expensive, and for a while there, it was very difficult to get. So
We've been fortunate in getting donations of helium, so different countries and our country as well. So we found ways of moving it.
Well, yeah. Trying to explain in Switzerland in French, what we're planning to do and how, don't worry, we'll protect those canisters, and
Yeah,
having my wife translate
very good.
in a specific format to the French, what we're intending to do. So,
I think Christiane has another question.
yep, sorry.
Yes, I'm wondering if you got the opportunity to install your hemisphere again, or your brain. Would it be all in a package and you can leave to a town or to another country to make the installation again, or do you have to sew all the things again?
So the only thing we need is electricity and a lot of helium, and we can put it almost anywhere.
That's right.
The brain,
Okay.
yes, they're compact. I think in our trip to Lausanne, or no, sorry, Norway was when we finally broke it down and kind of industrialized. We were fortunate enough to work with Christo out of the Umbrella Project, and I come from architectural design, so to see these umbrella project and to see how well engineered everything was, and then to come home to our bent aluminum poles and things that you'd look like that might have came from a Radio Shack or something.
I don't think it was.
Well, at one point that was, and then I took over.
It's a long time.
And then I took over, but no, but it took a while took a while to really, get us home down where we had nice aluminum structures and nice, fabricated parts and pieces. And at that point, I think it was a turning point where we figured out ways to engineer it, break it down so that it could travel in literally 6 boxes, I think. So,
Right.
and try to explain that to customs too. That's another interesting one. So, yeah. Yep, I own these.
I'd like to see those two together though.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
One doesn't require any helium at all, the brain, obviously. but the helium for the hemiflora is necessary.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure. If anybody there has another comment, idea, we're always open.
One of our guests would like to share a picture. So Eric and Sarah, who are on the call, are artists that are presently in Iowa, and they just ran actually an inflatable workshop at the KRASL Art Center very recently over the weekend, where they taught people of all ages to work together to create some inflatables. And I think so what we need to do is get you guys able to share with us, if that's all right. So Laura, I'm going to ask for your help with sort of guiding that process here.
So
Sure thing. I'm just going to, I've downloaded it actually, and Lou and Mark, if I can share my screen. So it's going to ask you.
Okay.
It's going to ask you when I do it to give me permission to do it.
Okay.
And I think you'll really enjoy the similarities here. Let's see what here we go. Did that work?
It says, oh, wow. Yeah. Look at that.
yeah.
So Eric and Sarah were the
Yes.
guests that we had, was that just last weekend, for an inflatable workshop. So they were dealing with, I think, a lot of the same concepts and conversations that you shared with us.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent.
Yeah. So what's the materials?
Okay, can you hear me okay? I turned
Yep.
on. Okay. The material is mylar, and we mostly are able to, we use them kind of, they're the safety blankets, the emergency blankets.
Okay, yeah.
They're about $1 a piece.
Yep.
And oh, there you go, Eric. He's actually in the living room, but I'm in the kitchen. So he's holding up on his screen the mylar blankets that we use. And
Okay. Right there. He's holding up the blanket.
yeah,
Like the space blankets.
they
Oh,
are
That's
space
what they made
Oh,
it
blankets.
out.
yeah. Okay.
The
Excellent.
workshop we hosted was actually called Space Architecture.
Uh-huh.
And it was about lightweight materials. And we created a dodecahedron that
Uh-huh.
originally we wanted to take to KRASL, but it was massive. It's very large. But I was really impressed and excited to see your presentation, and I think one of you had talked about play and learning, and I'm also an art teacher, and that really stuck with me because when I graduated college, one of my final papers was about play and giving even adults the opportunity to explore and not have any restrictions. And I really feel like this workshop that Eric and I did together was a good example of that, because we also, he's giving me things on the kitchen table. But we also had a good visualization, seeing people do that and not feel restricted by those boundaries, and by using materials that you can actually get from home, or just go to your local hardware store and grab. And so we started, this is what he handed me, but this is what we used at the KRASL workshop. But we started out with the tetrahedron and playing with scale. So Eric, my husband's an architect, and we have these little, there we go, scale model people. And that's how we started out this workshop, was with the inflatable tetrahedrons. And then we moved on, Eric and I inflated our dodecahedron for our final. And then I was digging through other pictures, but we also used tunnels to connect them, and I was very excited to see your tunnels. Yep.
So,
Yeah.
so I'm curious to find out, because as an art teacher, you have the flexibility for creative play and outcome, but architects don't get to make things that just are fun and blobs, right? So much. I mean, because they're really based on, that outcome, utilizing his creativity, his math, science, etc. So how do you handle when you've tried to make this perfect, icosahedron or dodecagon, and you've got flexible fabrics and it becomes a rounded, sphere, or a pentagon shaped
How did you
sphere?
deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, how do you make that okay? Because we never could, I don't think.
Yeah, Eric. Well, I think you can better answer that because I'll come up with a very artistic, organic shape is good kind of thing. But with Eric being the architect, I think he should definitely answer that question. Yep. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and turn off mine since we're actually in the same apartment together, but I'm gonna turn off my mic so he can turn his on.
Yep.
So
Eric.
I hope you can hear me okay, and that there's not an echo with the, we live in separate rooms nowadays. Anyway, so yeah, what you're mentioning is going from something that is the way you started, which is flat and two-dimensional, to something that wants to become three-dimensional. And you can already tell by the way this sort of crumbles. It's
Sure. Yeah.
It's not possible without patterning or templating, and that for me as an engineer and architect is a fascinating aspect. And you guys started right off the bat with that, where it's almost magical that you go from that two-dimensional surface, which only has a length and a width, to something which has double curvature to it, and it's
compound curves,
right,
and can breathe. Yeah,
and that can breathe and becomes something that is not just static but dynamic. And I started working with inflatables when I joined a company called Architects of Air. We're based in the UK, and we create luminaria, these very colorful labyrinthic structures. And I joined as a freelance project manager, so I would travel with these sculptures and make sure that they were erected correctly temporarily, and then packed and taken down at the end of an event. And I was fascinated by some of the wrinkles that I would see in the material, and they would be parallel wrinkles, either in a horizontal or in a vertical way, and
on a
sometimes
seam.
diagonal.
Yeah.
And that's where I thought I want to learn about why that happens, what it is. And I started studying membrane engineering, figuring out what it actually is that the material wants to do at that point. Because I think that's part of inflatable design, right? You listen very carefully to what the material wants, and an inflatable never wants to be a rigid box or a cube, for instance. It always wants to intrinsically become something that's soft and round and organic.
Right angles. Yeah.
And then sculpting with that the way you guys do, the brain that you started out with, I think was awesome. And then the potential that the material offers for people who have no formal training in geometry or architecture to create these large scale environments. It's just a very appealing medium to me as an architect, and I wish there was more of a market for it within the public realm and the built environment.
Well, what's interesting is, I mean, outside of the fact of the art aspects, I've always had curiosity in coming up with inflatable housing. That some way there'd be a way to make, because a lot of that material, like a rubberized fabric, can be so rigid and firm, and with some additional structural components can literally be almost a small insulated, dwelling. In some of these homeless structures or whatnot. I've always had a curiosity with potential developing something like that.
Yeah.
And my background as an industrial designer gives me some of that background, both from the engineering aspects and also from the design aesthetics, et cetera. But, inflatable membrane, I mean, that's amazing. I didn't even know something like that could even be learned. So
There's a literature recommendation that I would like to do. Actually, two of my favorite books. One is this one, The Science of Soap Films and Soap Bubbles.
Oh, cool.
By Cyril Eisenberg.
Okay.
If you look on YouTube and search for Cyril Eisenberg, you will find his lecture that goes with his research in soap films and soap bubbles, and it's excellent. It's entertaining. It's intelligent. It fuses math, art, science into this literal bubble of happiness that explodes in that classroom.
Yes.
So and the other book, it's an oldie, but Thomas Herzog and his work on pneumatic structures.
Wow.
And it's, you know, like some of the old school photographs, the actual photographs, physical photographs that you guys show that have that appeal. This book is full of that kind of stuff. And it bridges between art, science, engineering, and architecture, and is a very comprehensive handbook on anything inflatable and how it works. And although it dates to, I think, the late 50s or early 60s, much of it is still very much up to date. So those two,
yeah, definitely.
I keep those on my desk because I just like to look at them at least a few times a week and read a couple of pages and try to understand some of this stuff as well.
Oh yes,
which I don't. So anyway,
do math, right?
Yeah.
No,
and that's the other thing, right? So it starts with these simple paper models that anybody can do, and it spans that spectrum to these incredibly complicated nonlinear equations that nobody can do. Anything in between. It's a wonderful art form.
Yeah, it's accessible.
I can see inflatables for the future. I mean, on different planets, I mean, you can understand how we send people into space and where are they going to finally live and how they're going to live. I see the inflatable in the future working in many different ways, getting us there and being there and living there.
Yeah.
So inflatables are just on the very beginning of doing something beyond only just an art object. And I understand that as an artist, but I think it goes way further in what it can do for people and how it can make a difference in their lives. It's
you have to bring your own atmosphere anyway, right? So why not use it as your primary building material when you do go explore other planets like Mars or a satellite like the moon? I think you're very right. There's a future there.
Yeah.
Maybe the heavy flora will be 7 planets instead
First
of
on the moon. Let's just
7 continents.
Enlighten the moon. There's an ink stamp we could put up there.
Yeah.
Talk about peace building.
Yeah.
There was a really wonderful exhibition at the Walker Art Center sometime in the last, I'd say, 5 years. And the title of the exhibition was Hippie Modernism. And it was looking at concepts that were developed in the 60s and 70s and then bringing them up to today. And it included a section on inflatables, and they reference Herzog, and they reference this idea of, I'll just call it like a human terrarium to help us last as the earth crumbles, you know, that we can encase ourselves in and have our own ecosystems in. And it's a really, really wonderful exhibition, the way that it ties together, you know, what was happening then and what's happening now. So I recommend that. That'll be my literature recommendation, is to look up the catalog for that exhibit as well.
Yeah, we'll get a list together.
Yeah.
I remember, who was it that when we first ran into Crystal at the Harvard presentation, there was a series of artists that were doing non-traditional works. And I think you know, anything from like putting spheres up in space so they could create their own star, and other types of just these dynamics. You just like just go, whoa, you know, just really just, you know, it sounds like the hippie inspired in a sense, but you know, to generate your own star out of an inflated form or a, you know, articulated form up in space, which people are doing, but it's more from an electronic needs or means. But anyway, yeah, all very cool
I'm trying to
stuff.
put that all together and
Yeah.
figure out.
Yeah, to do. You still want to paint the moon, I think. So
Yeah, I've been doing that.
yeah.
You know,
Hey,
one
did-
thing
Did I
as
just
an
hear
artist.
what's next for Lou? He's painting the moon. Is that what I heard?
Yeah.
Lou's next
was that?
project?
Just wants to know, are you going to paint the moon?
Well, I wanted to say, I don't know if it's going to go that far, Tammy,
Yeah.
but I think there's something about, you know, being a painter and in learning that tradition, and then reaching out and finding all this whole new world, and then coming back to painting. The painting improves tremendously. I think that too often our good artists are so good they remain in a particular medium, maybe because his art historians seem to want to categorize them that way, but using those great talents to reach out and go beyond and then come back to the traditional. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Picasso did that all the time, you know, so we can learn from people like that. But I think that tonight's been really a reach, and it's very exciting, and to listen to all of you and your ideas and questions, and thank Sarah and Eric especially for just what their input was about. There's a whole new dimension of what's maybe going to happen, and I look forward to that in some way.
Well, thank you, Lou and Mark. We'll give you a round of applause virtually. Thank you so much for sharing with us this evening and joining us in this format. And thank you to everybody who's joined us from your various spaces around the world. We appreciate you being here and look forward to more conversations.
Yes.
And with that, I will say we're going to wrap up the event, and we welcome you to join us virtually on future third Thursdays at KRASL Art Center. We welcome you to connect with BIGthink in the future. Like I said, at one point, you know, I know that there's existing collaborators on here, and I dream of future collaborators as well. So here's to big thinking and big projects down the road.
That's great.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Lou.
Yeah. Ciao.
Yeah.
Ciao, ciao.
It's my guy.